Um, Here, I can post them in the chat room real quick. I'll do that in just a second. So you are live, Mark. You can get started, and then I will post the documents in the chat room.
Okay, great. Can I ask, can everyone see my presentation that says Advanced CMAs? Or are you seeing my smiling face?
Oh, well, actually, I think, Mark, it'll work best if you actually do the presentation present now.
Present now. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so if you do present now and then pick your screen with that blue Advanced CMA.
Okay. Can't get back over to, there we go. So bear with me a little bit on the mechanics of this. Your
Mark
entire
is
screen.
working serious next level screenage right now. I'm very impressed, Mark. So yeah, hit present now and then select your screen that has your blue advanced, and then they'll see a good presentation. And then they can also see you. For everybody on the call, to get a close-up, depending on how you have your settings set, to get a close-up when Mark starts working on his whiteboard, you'll be able to hit the pin over his face to get him to appear larger when he's doing that. But that looks great, Mark. We can see your presentation perfectly now.
Okay, excellent. Well, Aaron and Beth, thank you very much for the help. And so again, my name is Mark Stillings. I've been a realtor not quite 15 years, but we're getting there. So I've been at this for a while. And I love doing this advanced CMA class for a couple reasons. It's always fun to share and, you know, have that interaction and feedback. I think doing the class helps keep me sharp. As a matter of fact, in preparation for this training, I reached out to an appraiser buddy I've known for years and chatted with him for about 30 or 45 minutes. And so every time you do this, I feel like you get something new. I talked to someone that sat through the class last time, and they were like, yeah, I didn't quite get this or that. And the one thing I'd share is before I started teaching this class back in the day, I actually sat through it 4 times just to kind of get the real, you know, the groove and the feel for the information. So just in my humble opinion, always working on your craft, working on the ability to price homes is so central to what we do. So encourage you to sit in. I love if there's experienced agents, love the dialogue, love sharing information, talking about what if scenarios. So, you know, definitely ask questions. And if you've got some experiences that you want to share, I'm definitely open to having that be part of the conversation. So with that being said, I thought about this class a little bit, and I was talking to Jenny yesterday, and I think I'm going to change it up a little bit. In the past, I did a lot of, we kind of did some classroom theory for probably the first hour, and then started working on some of the mechanics the next hour. Today, I think I'm going to kind of get to some of them. We'll do a little bit of overview, do some mechanics 101 to kind of get the basics. We have a lot of new people on the call, I'm assuming. Then we're definitely going to talk about some theory, some what-if examples, some one-of-a-kind stuff that might come up. And then we'll get back at the end, if you stick around, and we'll work a little bit on some advanced mechanics. And by that, I mean looking at an advanced CMA and MLS, and also looking at making adjustments on Moxie. So that's kind of the overview today. And certainly if anyone wants to pipe in with questions or comments or additions, please let me know. So with that being said, why would we want to do a CMA in general and perhaps a advanced CMA? And if I'm on the right screen, it's not. There we go. I'm jumping ahead. There we go. Slide 2. I got it. All right. So per TREC guidelines, all listing associates must provide a written broker price opinion or comparative market analysis at the time the listing agreement is being negotiated. Broker requires all associates to submit a signed opinion of value disclaimer with listing agreement and upload CMA/BPO to paperless. So why do we want to, you know, besides the requirement, just philosophically, why do we want to make sure that we presented this information to our client, whether they be a buyer or a seller, and keep a copy on file? And so I guess, you know, what's kind of become famous in the last year or so is, you know, the tale of Karens. If you think of the Karens out there in the world, and they get mad when their chicken nuggets are cold and they're ready to yell at the manager and escalate things. Just imagine if you have a client that you didn't go through the step with, and perhaps their neighbor whispers in their ear a couple months after the transaction when they sold their house that, hey, buddy, that realtor really hosed you. You left $30,000 of equity on the table. So if you think people get mad over chicken nuggets, just imagine how they'll get when they think there's money involved. And one little saying I have in real estate is like, everybody's your friend until something goes wrong. So if you haven't been there yet, you're going to be at some point. And so and again, it's not all the time. It's certainly not even a significant part of the time, but at some point in your career, you're going to run into that client that for some reason feels that they haven't been dealt with properly or fairly or competently, and you want to have your ducks in a row, and you might end up doing 100 CMAs to cover that one time where someone's really kind of bent out of joint and ready to make a stink. So, it's required as part of our real estate practice. I know Aaron would jump up and down and say, this is something we got to do. And it's just a great way to operate in terms of handling your clients. If they're informed and educated, you have a better relationship, and that's going to pay off in terms of repeat business down the road. So for all those reasons, having a CMA on file that you can reference should there be a question later is really a great business practice. Let's go to the next slide. So there are different approaches to identifying value on a property, and I'm not going to talk too much about the first two. Income approach, really just if you won't get into the realm of pricing properties for investors, and you're going to look at like cash flow and rates of return, cap rates, things like that, it'll be helpful to know the income approach to valuing a property. Cost approach, that's really a situation where perhaps there isn't a lot of comparable data. And I kind of usually reference the idea that if for people in San Antonio that know where Wild Horse is, at one point in the day, D.R. Horton went and built the first house on the other side of 1604, and they had to create a value where there are no comps that were probably readily available at that time. So in a situation like that, an appraiser might look at bill of materials, labor costs, margins, and help it build a price sort of from the ground up that way. The great thing about us as realtors is we definitely don't have to worry about cost approach in our approach. Income approach, again, if you're working with investors, I think that's the next great level to go to. There's a lot of online research you can get to figure out how do investors think, what are gross rent multipliers, what are cap rates, what's cash on hand and cash over cash and things like that. But for today's purpose, we're going to focus on number 3, which is a sales comparable approach. And that's really just looking at sold activity in the immediate area, and we'll kind of get down into what some of the qualifiers are, but we're trying to create an apples to apples comparison so we can determine the value of a property based on similar recent transactions that would equate and be equal to equivalent of the property we have in question. So before I go any further, any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to go a little bit deeper on this, but I do want to talk about principles of contribution and substitution. So when we start looking at adjustments on properties, I'm probably going to say this several times, but the first thing I want you to keep in mind, and I was talking with Aaron after the last class, is you really don't want to be doing a ton of adjustments. That in our realm, a lot of the time, maybe most of the time, you can look at a particular neighborhood, let's say it's Stubing Ranch, and it's a D.R. Horton neighborhood, and there's like inventory, and you can find enough of the similar floor plans with the similar finish outs, and you really can get pretty like to like in your comparison without really doing much in way of adjustments, or maybe no adjustments at all, especially if it's a neighborhood that's maybe a little bit newer. Maybe it's a Stillwater Ranch and things are a little more recent. Maybe you're not really adjusting anything at all except for perhaps square footage. So as we go through this exercise and we look at the comparable adjustment guide, I want you to think that hey, if I'm lining out 6, 8, 10 adjustments, a little alarm bell should go off in your head. Like you're overcooking it. And a really good market analysis, CMA, would involve a minimal number of adjustments. In fact, appraisers have guidelines. They can only have a 15% net adjustment and a 25% gross adjustment. So they even have parameters to say, look, we want to start with things that are pretty similar to begin with before we start doing any dialing in and tweaking. So keep that in mind. So back to principle of contribution. What we look at is what percentage of value would any particular item that's unique and distinctive about a property or comp that you're looking at, how much would that add or subtract? And so the one that's pretty easy to talk about is a pool. And I'm just going to start with that one. We're going to go in a little deeper, but just to illustrate a point, let's say a brand new pool in a $300,000, $350,000 price range Anyone want to throw up on the board what they might think, like a typical pool, nothing crazy, nothing econo, but what would that run right now? See if I can get a couple volunteers. Someone said 20K. I want to find your pool builder. All right, Terry, 60 to 100, a 30K, 20. Okay, I would say that at that price range, probably 50 to 60K is probably a typical average pool. You certainly can get a lot more ornate and expensive. You could easily, back to Terry's point, you could spend 100 if you want to. If you did something really kind of econo and basic, it might be 30 or 40,000. But let's just kind of use 50,000 for easy math. Well, if I'm in a neighborhood with all $300,000 homes, just to keep this illustration simple, and I'm the only house with a pool, and I've spent 50,000, would an appraiser say, well, the value of your house, because in this magical neighborhood, every house was built the same with the same finish outs and the same floor plan at 300,000, would you just take 300,000 and add 50,000 for the pool and have a value of 350,000? Well, unfortunately for us as realtors, and Warren hit it, a lot of people said no. Unfortunately, though, for us as realtors, is a lot of the public thinks that's the way it works. And so we've got to be we got to understand how it does work so we can explain it, because in some situations, you're going to have to be the bearer of bad news, because I'll bet you probably 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, that seller might think they're getting that extra 50,000, but they're not. And really, it kind of goes to principle of contribution, because what an appraiser will say is, I will give you partial value for that pool, because the higher up in price you go, now you have other options. Maybe you're in a neighborhood with decent schools at 300,000, and you're shopping there. But if you expanded your budget to 350, you could move maybe across the highway into a better school district. Maybe you could go from a non-gated to gated community, maybe better quality homes with a better quality builder. So you start to have other choices. So there's sort of a pressure, downward pressure, on any particular item that says that you're not going to get full value. Just historically, that's the case. So we're going to get, and Warren said possibly the buyer really wanted the pool. You raise a good point. What we're going to see is a buyer might say, I would pay the 350, but historically the data that the appraisers use to establish the value says, as a rule of thumb, that we're probably going to allow maybe 30 to 40% of the overall value of that pool. And so when they set the value, when they file their report, their appraisal report, that's what they're going to allow. And I had a conversation with the appraiser yesterday, and he goes, Mark, when I complete the report, I'm not trying to convince you of the value. I'm not trying to convince the other agent of the value. I'm just trying to convince the lender of the value, because they're the ones that are writing the check, essentially for that property. And they have to see the value and they have to believe into it. So that's their audience. So keep that in mind. Like to Warren's point, yeah, that buyer could be keyed up, and maybe they would go ahead and write a contract for 350, but that lender is going to say time out. If that house ever gets repossessed and we have to take it back and resell it, we're not going to get the 350. The real value might be closer to 320. And so that's what we're going to lend on it, because we don't want to have exposure where we've got a $350,000 loan on a $320,000 property. Now, later we'll have some conversations. There's obviously a lot of activity about people going over list price and over appraisal value. And we're going to get to that. It creates some interesting situations and scenarios. And as a buyer's agent, you have to know how to navigate that. But for kind of our purposes right now, we're starting with kind of the one-on-one basics of how the process works. So substitution, I kind of hit into that topic as values start to go up. If you simply took a house and added all the remodeling projects and added up the value of each one, came up with a new high price, the principle of substitution says the buyer can start to look at alternatives that might be better or equal. It pulls those into play. And that's, again, what kind of caps the value. We'll see. I'm going to include, there's a cost versus value report. And you can look at it, and the values that NAR allows vary. But I would say that I looked at it out of 25 items, 14 of them were either in the high 40s or low 50s%. There certainly were some 60s and 70s. But I'll tell you, just doing this a long time, when I talk to people that go, kind of a gut rule of thumb is you're going to get about 50% on the dollar on any capital project. Does that vary? Absolutely. But if you want a generality, just to have perspective, just when you, and this is important when you're talking to people to purchase a house and they start talking about, I'm going to add a pool, I'm going to add an outdoor kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. You can add value as an agent by saying that's great and you are going to improve the value of your house, but realize you're not going to get all that value back. So that pool that you put in, make sure that some of that's a value of lifestyle, that if you only got 30 or 40 cents on the dollar back, that you still felt good about that 5 years from now because you had the lifestyle enjoyment that made up the other 60, 70%. So that's where you can become a value-added consultant to your client, is to walk them through those scenarios. Okay. Any other questions before I move forward? All right. And I'm trying to get back on the screen. Give me a second. There we go. I think I'm there. So we're going to do a CMA, and I'm going to kind of toggle over here in a second to MLS. This is here, and I'm not going to read through it, process and steps on doing a CMA. So it's here just as backup, especially for newer people. If you want to follow along on the screen, but come back to this, this is helpful information. It kind of gets into doing some more detailed work. You know, looking at, it does have some good suggestions in here. Take a bird's eye view at the property. If something backs up to a water tower, a power line, you know, maybe a strip mall, that can have impacts on value. So doing some of this background work is helpful. But what I'm going to do right now is just jump to MLS. And I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm going to use the classic view because that's what I've done for almost 15 years. And I'm learning the modern view like everyone else. But to make this class go, I think I'm going to just stick with classic view to make it easy. And what I want to do right here is just kind of walk through some of the basic considerations in doing a CMA. And I wouldn't call this part advanced, but it's definitely kind of some of the standard stuff that you'll do. Again, as I mentioned earlier, probably 80, maybe 90% of the time, just doing this is sufficient. And so if you have the right approach and the right skill set here, it's gonna solve the problem for you a large percentage of the time. So some of the things that I look at when I come in here is, if I'm looking at a CMA, and I'm going to pick Rogers Ranch for a minute, for those of you familiar with that, but I would look at all of these type of properties. Everything is active in any form, solds and pendings. You know, what is going to drive your value is what is sold. However, I will tell you, when you're consulting with your client, I always say that the sold is the history, but the actives are what are competitive at the market. We're looking to go on the market in the next week or two, perhaps, or maybe the next 2-3 months out. What are we going to be up against when we get into the market in the next time frame, X number of weeks, X number of days, et cetera? I also include this information when I do an appraisal packet, when I'm the listing agent, to leave for the appraiser when they come in. If you think about that, the appraisers, you know, everyone's busy. Appraisals are running long. Everyone's backed up. If you can provide some information that helps kind of narrow down the process for the appraiser, they are not going to take your appraisal packet and cut and paste and go word for word. But if you can kind of help steer them a little bit and get their project done a little bit faster, some appraisers will appreciate that and use that information. And so if I can have a hand in the ingredients, I feel like, you know, I'm helping the outcome of the meal. Now, I will tell you, some appraisers probably take your appraisal packet as an agent and throw it in the trash. There's some crotchety old grumpy people that have been doing this a long time, and especially VA appraisers, and they feel like there's nothing any agent knows that could help me out. And candidly, I will tell you, there's a lot of agents that really aren't trained in the art of pricing that provide some really spurious information. And so some of that reputation is earned. But I will also tell you that if you do a good job with your pricing and you provide quality information to the appraiser, they're more apt to take it in consideration. In talking with Jeff yesterday, the appraiser I work with, he says, I take note of the agent, and if I know it's someone that's been at it for a while, that gets homes sold, that's got credibility, and when they provide an appraisal packet, it's on point. If the agent has some credibility, I'm much more apt to make an assumption that they know what they're doing, and this transaction probably more than likely is on point. You know, not that they can't be disproven, but they're going to start with that mentality of, like, I assume this is going to be all right, and I'm going to work from there, versus walking in and going, well, this looks like someone that's, you know, has no idea what they're doing. They're 100,000 over list. I'm going to start to shoot holes all through it. I've been told by appraisers that they cannot use appraisals. So I think, Rich, to your question, I don't think that they can reuse an appraisal, but you absolutely can provide information that they can consider and factor into their research. They're going to do their own thing. But I haven't, in the past when it was a little more touchy as to whether you might get value or not, I can think back a couple of years, 2 years, 4 years, maybe 6 years when the market was first turning up. In some cases, when a person had unique characteristics in their house, I would get a pre-listing appraisal done. And I'd encourage the seller, hey, spend $400, spend $500, and have a much better sense of why your house would make a certain value when you've maybe done X, Y, and Z the other houses haven't done. And I will also tell you miraculously, every time I did a pre-listing appraisal, guess what? The value came right in at the pre-listing appraisal price. Not saying that they took it one for one, but we're all human. And if you had an appraisal that you needed to do for a seller this afternoon and you thought I was experienced and I pre-worked it for you and gave it to you right now, would that probably creep into your listing presentation this afternoon? Probably so. You'd obviously give it put your own set of eyes on it and work. But if the work was 80% done, you'd probably take advantage of that, especially if you had 3 other listing appointments in the next 2 days. So I hope that, back to that one refused it. Yeah, there are some people that just, that don't want the help, that kind of are stuck in their ways and there's nothing really can do about it. So what we're doing is kind of creating a message that works a good percentage of the time, but not all the time. So back to here. Next thing I want to talk about is months back. And we all heard in the sales meeting the other day that values of, Aaron and Alberto are great about kind of staying on top of the market and know where values are. So right now things have moved so much in the last 2 months that in the last 2 months, value's up 4% in 2 months, which if you equate out is about 24% a year, which is sort of just a mind-blowing rate. So in a perfect world, you would go back here and go get 2 months worth of data. I will tell you though, because there's a lack of inventory, what I think we're going to run into sometimes is maybe there's just not enough data in the last 2 months. And so you might be in a situation, I'd say, look, go do 2 months if you can get it. And if you have enough information, absolutely use it. But if there's not enough information, you might go back, say 4 months or 6 months. But if you do that, this is an art as much as it is a science. And you may have to do some interpretation. Maybe most of your comps are 2 months old, but when you're doing your market analysis for your seller or preparing your listing packet for your appraiser, you might have to pull a comp for 6 months ago, but you're going to have to make some mental adjustment that, hey, that thing sold at $300,000 6 months ago, but I know values are up at least 4% in the last 2 months. Well, that's $12,000. And I need to give some value for that previous 4 months, maybe, and I would look at the data, but maybe that's an extra $10,000. So that comp might get adjusted upwards. $24,000 would not be out of the realm of possibility. So we'll kind of walk through how we do that. But again, keep in mind that just by clicking some things here doesn't absolve you of some problem solving. It helps. It's raw material. It's groceries, but you got to still cook a meal. Okay. So I'm going to try 2 months. Okay. Then probably the most significant thing that we deal with that you're going to adjust most commonly is square footage. And we're going to get into this a little bit deeper, but I'm going to just tell you right now for our purposes that an appraiser will look at plus or minus 20% square footage. And they would like you to have a comp or two lower and a comp or two higher. So think about that when you're working with your sellers, that if the subject is 3,000 square feet, I don't want to have all my comps be 3,000 and then 2,400, 2,200, because I'm not triangulating. I'm not getting a value, a realistic 360 look at the value of the property. And where that can really hurt you is if you pull everything under that's then your subject that's smaller, the per square foot numbers are going to be higher. That's just the way it works. And we'll talk about that in a bit, assuming again, kind of similar inventory. And so all the other numbers are going to look bigger per square foot, and you're going to have a hard time kind of talking your way out of why your subject is less per square foot. So that's a little bit of a trap. So we're going to talk about that. So in this case, I'm going to just say our subject is 3,000 square feet. And to make it real simple, I could go as much as 600 differential higher or lower. Jenny, if you're out there, I hope you're happy because I'm I'm doing this for you. Another thing is we want to use similar floor plans. We want to go like to like inventory as much as possible. And so an appraiser will absolutely, on the typical appraisal report, use 2-story to 2-story, ones to ones. What do you do on a 1.5? That gets a little bit tricky. I like to price those more accordingly to 1 stories, but there may be situations where you have to pull in 2. Kind of the big input or the big impact of whether it's a 1-story or a 2-story is that proportionally building a house is cheaper for the same square footage on 2 stories than 1. And the reason for that is the biggest cost component of a home is concrete. So if I'm building a 1-story home, I have a lot more concrete proportional to the overall build than if I have a 2-story. And so that's why we try and stay with that and stay in the same category, the same class. If anyone's, now this is just an opinion, I'm going outside the appraisal world for a second. If you ask me, Mark, what is the variance? My opinion, and you would never put this in a CMA, you'd never put it in a report, but just from experience, I think it's about a 7% differential in the cost of a build from a 1-story to 2-story, with 1-story being more. And where do I kind of pull that number out of my hat? Well, the next time you're in a new home community, ask to say, hey, could you show me a 3,000 square foot plan, 1-story and 2-story? And if you do that with a few builders over time, miraculously, it seems to kind of fall in that at least 5, 6, 7% differential. So that's just for curiosity. I kind of geek out on some of this stuff. Again, that will not make its way into a CMA, and it will not make its way into an appraisal unless you start doing some real remote properties, but that's a whole nother animal and doesn't get into what we're doing. Okay, then what are kind of some of the other key essentials here? Year built. I'm going to tell you, I probably wouldn't put a whole lot more into my initial search because I want to get as many possible matches to start, and then I'm going to pare it down from there. So in my scenario, I might just start with this and say, what have I got? You know, what am I working with? I'm going back just 2 months. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to pick an area that I know and like. And I like it for these purposes because it there has some variance in here. So I'm looking at Rogers Ranch. Now I will tell you, appraisers do not want you to cross major boundaries. So I would tell you it's a great exception that you would ever cross, say, 1604 or come out here, if I zoom out a little bit, and cross 10. So for the sake of our purposes, we would stay on this side of 1604, this side of 10, and I think I'm going to have enough data just in, Rogers Ranch. And anyone that knows Rogers Ranch knows there's a multitude of sections out there. There's Cross Timber, Falling Brook, Point Bluff, Salado Creek. So a lot of times that can sort of be a distinction right there. I was talking to someone last week about Indian Springs. And Indian Springs has different sections, including the estates, and then just quote unquote normal Indian Springs. And she was having a little trouble finding enough comparable information in Indian Springs. And she asked me, should I go to the estates? And my first reaction is no, we've got different lot sizes. And so she asked, well, could I just adjust for lot size? And if that was the only difference, you probably could. However, when you go to estates, you have larger lots, you have generally higher quality of building materials, you've got features and finish outs that are different grade than the kind of standard Indian Springs. So in that particular case, we'd want to stay in Indian Springs first. And if we had to, we might even go to a different section out there off TPC of a similar builder before you would go into the estates, because now I'm dealing with, you know, it's sort of the difference between like a Toyota and a Lexus. You know, they're fundamentally maybe similar cars, but one's got a luxury brand, one's got higher accessories and nav packages and things like that. So they're too different for me to kind of measure against each other. Okay, what was the first search criteria entered? Okay, so the first thing I did, well, let me finish that, and I'll come back to your question here. So I am going to work with Salado Creek, and I'm going to just try and stay in that section. Anyone that's been out there, that neighborhood's been building for a long time. And there are some variances in terms of age. We'll get into that in a minute. But I would like to start there and see, the first thing I look at is 4 is my count. How are you doing? So back to your question, I would put in, I look at all the actives and then pending and solds. And then I came down and I did 2 months. But now I'm going to change that to, I just want to, maybe I can get away with 4. Let's see what that does for me. Still at 4. And this kind of runs into the problem I kind of foreshadowed a little bit ago is we'd love to stay in 2 months every time we can, but you know, there's not a lot of inventory, so that's working against us. Let's see what 6 months does. 6, that's better. I will tell you that appraisers, their guidelines generally are 6 months or less. They will go up to a year. However, they like to avoid that. So again, that would get them in a situation where they may have to be adjusting more than they would like. So, you know, 6 months or less is priority, up to a year is acceptable. And, you know, how you know that is you'll find out that appraisals get submitted and then the underwriter looks it over. And sometimes you've gotten an appraisal submitted and you've made value. The lender will tell you, hey, we've made value, but we're waiting for underwriting approval. So even after they do it, the underwriter is going to put another set of eyes. And sometimes they question, hey, Mr. or Miss Appraiser, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And the appraiser may have to go back and justify, I did it for X, Y, and Z. All right, so 6. So I would take a look at that. 6 possibly could work. And then I like to throw this into a CMA summary. Okay. So I've got 3 sold comps. I feel there's enough information there to proceed. I wouldn't go back further 9 or 12 months. Sometimes if you're kind of on the borderline, and I will tell you in a perfect world, I'd rather have 8, 10, 12, and then make some decisions on a few I want to drop out. So, you know, I'd like to have that flexibility, but I met with a seller and presented a CMA with 6 comps? Absolutely. So one thing that's really important, and if we get into Rogers Ranch, one thing we're going to see as I go through some of these, this is the next step of the exercise. And Lydia, I hope I answered your question. You know, this would kind of be on the lower end of what I'd like to present. In a perfect world, maybe I've got more 8, 10, 12, and probably I'm looking at that many, at least 12, 15 to pare it down. Because here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to tell you this page of information can be deceitful. I mean, what do I mean by that? We've got things that should be from our search pretty similar, but I see one here at 459 and one at 559. That's a $100,000 range. Actually, it sold, you know, the range gets a little less here. Sold at 459 and at 535. Okay. Sorry about that. So what I will do is start to look through these. And if you know Rogers Ranch, you're going to start to look at builder. There's different grades of builder out there. There's David Weekly product, which is a nice product. There's Newmark, which I would say is probably is a better version in my opinion, but would be comparable. There are custom builders that you may or may not pull into your appraisal based on the amount of data available, but I certainly would make some adjustments. So the things I'm looking at, I'll kind of pop this up here for a second. Then you're kind of looking at everything, but obviously key things: square footage, age. We're going to talk about age. In a perfect world, I'd like to be less than 5 years plus or minus, and the closer I can get, the better. Because again, back to one of my initial comments, the less you have to tweak and dial things, the truer the comp is to the subject you're working on, and that's what makes for a better appraisal. We'll see that in a little bit. I'm looking at bedrooms and baths, 4, 3.5. So I'm making note of that. But I do want to point something out, and you'll get different opinions on this, but here's my theory. You don't want to double adjust for things. So if I'm adjusting for square footage between houses, I personally don't want to turn around and adjust for bedrooms. And so the illustration I would give is, I'm in Rogers Ranch, and I've got a 3,000 square foot house with one has 3 bedrooms and a big game room, and the other one has 4 bedrooms and no game room. And let's assume everything else is the same because they were built at the same time by David Weekley, same finish outs. That was really the only adjustment. Is there a variance in the value of those properties? Now, I think a lot of people would say, hey, the extra bedroom is worth something. But keep in mind, when you have the extra bedroom, you're giving up the loft. So if you were going to adjust everything, you'd have to add for the bedroom and take away for the lack of loft. And so now you're doing 2 adjustments. In my personal opinion, and I will tell you other people might feel differently, but my feeling is if I'm doing the adjustment for square footage, that accounts for the variance in the bedrooms. Because if you think about it, economically, to change a 3-bedroom game room to 4 bedrooms just involves a little bit of sheetrock, right? So you're not going in there and doing plumbing and electrical and all that expensive things. You're just doing some sheetrock. And if you took a dozen buyers out to the community, and just depending on their family makeup, half of them, I think, would go to 3 bedrooms in a game room, and half might go, we've got that extra kid, we need 4 bedrooms. So the market would say those are essentially equivalent. So I'm not going to double count for bedrooms. So I don't start with bedrooms. Now, if I get in a situation where I've got a bunch of 5 bedrooms and one of my comps comes up as a 3-bedroom, am I likely to drop that comp out and just work with the 5 bedrooms? Probably. But again, if I've got 5s and 4s and maybe the difference is a game room, I'm going to treat those very similarly, and I'm going to make my adjustments based on size. So I'm accounting for the differential one time when I calculate the square footage. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to just take a second here. I think we've covered how many comps you recommend. Yeah, and Nellie, I think it's the same. I want to go out with good, solid information. I think what you kind of saw, in my opinion, is kind of a minimum of what you could do in a listing presentation and an appraisal. I would probably spend more time if this wasn't a class. I'd fish around a little bit longer and see if I could find a way to pull in another comp, maybe from another similar section. Maybe I would go Salado Creek. I might go to the vineyards and pull a property out of there that's similar. So I think what I put up there on the CMA is kind of the lower end of the threshold, and I'd like to see a little bit more. Okay, lot size. Sandra asked about lot size. We are going to address that in a minute. It is not as significant as you think. Okay, other critical things I'm looking at, and I hope I get this all, but for comparative purposes, some of the big items are garage parking. In this community, you could see a 2-car or a 3-car. That would be a significant item. So would I compare a house with a 2-car garage to a house with a 3-car garage? Absolutely. If I don't have enough other houses with 3-car garages, would I pull a house in with a 2-car garage? Absolutely. Am I going to look at making some allowance, some adjustment for not having that extra garage? Yes, I will. Lot size. Let's get back there. So lot size, 0.2, and Rogers Ranch is a community where you might see things, 0.2 is pretty common. You might see 3rd-acre lots, maybe in a few, kind of extreme situations, cul-de-sacs. You might see a half acre, 0.6. Appraisers are, I will say this, buyers favor land more than appraisers. So from a marketing perspective, your buyers get super attracted. If it's a 1/4-acre lot versus maybe a 0.4, buyer associates a lot of value with that. If you talk to an appraiser, a lot of times they will say, hey, once you have enough, you've got your house, you've got your garage, you've got some backyard, front yard, you can kick the soccer ball. How much value really is in that extra land? And so when there are differentials of maybe 0.05, 0.08, from like going from 0.2 to 0.228, that's not really going to probably move the needle for an appraiser at all. If you're going from a 1/4 acre to a 1/2 acre, then there could be some value there. However, keep in mind, you're going to probably have to do some work to isolate the value of land. And in all these illustrations, actually, the best way to do it is to be able to pull some comps at a 1/4 acre and then pull some comps at a 1/2 acre and see, is there a material difference in sales price? Now, again, assuming the houses are basically similar and like in nature, can I demonstrate that people paid an extra $25,000 in Rogers Ranch for an extra 1/4 acre of land to get a 1/2 acre instead of a 1/4 acre? That's the way an appraiser wants to do it. The problem is that data isn't always available. And so again, back to this being an art versus a science, as a listing agent, I would say maybe I can't get enough comps to point at this point in time that a half acre in Rogers Ranch sells more than a quarter acre, but I have experience. I can look at land values and tax records. I'm going to sort of rub my tummy and pat my head and make some allowance that, hey, I think a buyer would maybe allow an extra $10,000, maybe $15,000 for that oversized lot. And then I'm going to count on the fact that the house in totality will support that value. So again, a little bit of art as much as science. Okay. Okay, good question here. Do you use a minimum of 600 square feet for any size home? So again, that 600 square feet came from plus or minus 20%. So if we drop down to 2,000 square feet, it would be plus or minus 400. If we go up to 4,000 square feet, it would be plus or minus 800. Again, that's a starting point. And if I can get away with comps that are maybe less, maybe they're only 10% apart and I have enough data, I would look to that. Again, I want to try and keep things as similar as possible. Obviously, there's more adjusting being done from a 3,000 square foot house to a 24 square foot house versus 3,027. So the more I can keep things in a tighter range, the better. With keeping in mind, I need something smaller. I probably need something at the size and something bigger. And I might have 3 or 4 comps in that case. Terry mentioned I start by trying to stay within the same subdivision. Is it cool to go to another? Yes. It can be, but I will tell you, don't do it this way. I see a lot of agents, they go fishing for subdivisions just to find something that supports their value. Like, hey, my seller really wants 350, and I've got maybe I'm in Turning Stone. Let's pick 1103 because that's a really good area to talk about similar subdivisions, right? So if you go up and down that road, there's Meritage, Lennar, DR Horton. They're kind of same, different flavors of vanilla out there. You know, if you get into the Emerald product, that jumps up a little bit, but there's a half dozen subdivisions out there very similar. If I'm in Saddle Creek, and maybe I've got the listing, the seller wants the highest value at 350. These days maybe 400. So they want the highest value at 400, and everything else in Saddle Creek is at 360, 350, 340, 360. You need to look at those comps first and don't just jump over to Turning Stone to find yourself a $400,000 listing. The appraiser's gonna start on home base, which they consider the subdivision first, and when they've exhausted that, then they would go to another subdivision. So you can, but you know, just be mindful. Don't go fishing for a value by casting into other subdivisions. Okay. All right, Jenny's got a question. I'm gonna go offline. That's pretty specific. So Jenny, if we'll come back to that because I don't. You've got a kind of a situation. I don't want to kind of get off track here. Okay, let me see if I can get back to screen here. Good questions. I appreciate the questions. So what else am I looking at? You know, I read the remarks because I want to see what did the agent think was of note, and I kind of take a highlighter and look. If I'm in a neighborhood where everything's got granite counters and stainless steel appliances, I don't care. That's considered kind of like. But what I am looking for, maybe taking my highlighter, is notating things like wood throughout, outdoor kitchen. You know, what's different and distinct about this property that might merit some adjustments versus all the other ones that were built by the same builder at the same time, at the same way, at about the same value. So just the fact that someone goes, you know, tile floors, stainless steel counters, granite, you know, kind of, I'm not diminishing it, but there's nothing distinct about it. So I'm not going to make a note of that. I do print these out, and I will take a highlighter as part of my process and highlight the things that really stand out. So if I'm in a neighborhood, like going back to Saddle Creek on 1103, and if for some reason I saw a house with a 3-car garage, I know that's distinct in there. That would be something I'd highlight, and I'd kind of come back when I'm looking at making my final selections and perhaps my adjustments. Okay. What else down here? Roof is a significant one. Some neighborhoods, especially in Stone Oak, you might get transition from, there's composition, heavy comp, metal roofs, tile roofs. Those are things that the metal and tile can definitely make a difference in value. Or if you have a bunch of houses that are metal and tile, and your subject that you're working on the listing only has heavy comp, there's going to be a deduction for that value of the difference between a heavy composition roof and a metal or a tile roof. Terry, where did I get the CMA summary? Okay. Let me close this. Well, let me finish this and I'll go back to that, Terry. Okay. What else do I look at? Those are probably the big things. I might look at fireplaces. I mean, I look at all this, but I'm just trying to point out the things I think that make the most value. Pool is obviously one we've talked about. That's going to be a big deal. Lot features can add value. Distinct size, being on a cul-de-sac, being on a green belt can add some value. I'm going to warn you though, just because the builder charged a $15,000 premium for a greenbelt lot or a cul-de-sac lot, that's what they paid the builder. You're probably not going to see that value from the appraiser. I would say almost definitely not going to see that value. So if someone spent $15,000 to get a greenbelt lot, my gut would tell me if you get $5,000 of value on your resale, you're probably doing pretty good. And again, what an appraiser would say is, Mark, show me where you can pull 3-4 sales on a greenbelt of similar homes, and then go over here and pull 3-4 sales inside the neighborhood that aren't on a greenbelt of similar homes, and show me where there's a difference in value. Prove to me that there's 15,000. And historically, that you can't, and so that value is going to be a lot lower. We're going to talk about comp grids a little bit later. I put one out there. I want you to know that the appraisers work from something, I think it's called a UAD, but it's basically it's a grid in a computer. So they've got access to all, this history of appraisals, and they plug something in and they get a value, so they know. Okay. And so they're going to reference that. So a lot of things that buyers and agents would put a lot of value on, just historically, don't be surprised if your appraiser is going to give you less. Question about neighborhoods of mix old and new. So think about cars for a second. Would you, if you were going to get a Kelley Blue Book out and value a new car to an old one, would you compare those? And the answer would be no. So new construction is going to stand on its own, and old construction is going to be a separate bucket. So for the vast majority of what we're doing, you're always going to be looking at resale comps. I can think of in 15 years, I had one situation where someone bought a house, life circumstances changed, they never moved in, they turned around and resold it at 4 months. The appraiser let me get away with submitting new home sale comps because the effective age, all the utilization of the home, it was a new home. The sales date was 4 months old, but it was essentially a new home. So it's pretty rare that would come up. So I would say 99.99% of the time you're going to be working resale comps with old inventory. Now, to get to that question again in a second, or a little different angle, is will you adjust for age? Like in Rogers Ranch, we're going to see some stuff that's maybe 2000, 2002, 2004, and some stuff that's 2016. Are you going to adjust for that age? Yes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. And question about composition. When we talk about the adjustment grid, we'll get to that in a second. We got someone that's working on ABOR. Gotcha. Okay. So same principles. Obviously, the format of how you see the information in ABOR is a little bit different. A good question about KB Home versus a David Weekley. So this comes up a lot. I say in every community, not every community, but most communities, there's probably a distinct A builder and a B builder. There's probably Highland Homes and David Weekley. There might be David Weekley and KB, those kind of scenarios. Again, an appraiser would challenge you, show me that then in that second scenario, David Weekley and KB Home, show me that you can pull 3-4 comps that show that David Weekley homes sell higher than KB homes for the same, everything else being similar, square footage, 1-story versus 2-story, etc. If you can document that, you can push for that extra value. And I have absolutely done that on a home that's been an A builder and I'm reselling it. And there's a handful of comps that are at a higher price point and a handful of comps that are a lower price point. And I've submitted with documentation, written a cover letter that, hey, Mr. Appraiser, Miss Appraiser, mine are David Weekley homes, and here are the other David Weekley comps that are selling at X price. So they will look at that. So there does get to be, if for any of you that haven't looked at they call it a URAR, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, I encourage you to get one and read through it with a highlighter. I just did that again a couple weeks ago because you really want to understand what they're looking at. It's way more intense, obviously, than a CMA, but if you know how they think, it helps you prepare your information. and they will look at quality of construction. So that can be a factor for sure. All right. I know I've got some vets out there, and I'm kind of doing this on the fly. Is there anything else for key exterior features? We're going to talk about covered patio versus a deck. We see that a lot in Stone Oak. Some really nice homes, but a lot of them just have patio slabs. Some have covered patios. That could definitely be an adjustment. The pool we talked about. Flooring will be something. Obviously, if you've got a home that has extensive wood flooring versus most of the comps just have maybe no wood, maybe they have carpeting or just wood in limited areas, you can do some adjustments there. I will tell you though, make sure that it's distinct and different. If you're trying to give value to your seller, to your listing, because they've got wood flooring, make sure the 3 or 4 comps that you're looking at, for sales and a couple, 3 actives for inventory on the market, don't all have the same type of flooring. Like a house I lived in, we bought, the builder was Highland, and it came standard with wood flooring and like the living areas in the study. And we went ahead and ripped out the carpet and did wood flooring through the whole house. Well, that's distinct and different, and you can get extra value. But if we had just resold the home with the standard wood flooring the builder did, which was living areas and study, well, heck, every other house in the neighborhood was built the same way. So you're not getting an adjustment. You're not getting some positive increase for wood flooring because everything you're looking at is the same way. Okay. So someone asked about a 3-year-old weekly and a brand new KB. So again, I wouldn't get into that because it's a brand new KB. I would exclude it and if I was trying to do something on the value of KB homes, I would stick with new inventory, and I wouldn't be comparing it to a 3-year-old David Weekley. And I would say if you get into that rare circumstance where you have no other options, that might be a great time to call, ask Aaron, ask Alberto, ask someone in the office, how would you crack that puzzle? Because generally you shouldn't really be in that situation. There should be enough other choices that you could go to the next neighborhood. Again, like in the 1103 scenario, you could go from Saddle Creek down to Buffalo Crossing, those different, what's the other one? Cibolo Heights, etc. So there's a bunch of them. Good questions. Keep them coming. I was going to ask, is there anything else up here? Because I'm doing this on the fly. Does anyone else have a suggestion on we're going to get to a grid sheet, so we'll see others. But while I'm right here, is there anything else anyone would be looking at kind of first blush to factor in terms of making an adjustment? Okay. I think we've hit most of, if not all, the major ones. But again, we're going to look at a grid sheet in just a minute. Now I got to get back to, I got to go right to go left here. All right. One other thing I just really want to emphasize, and I think I'll come down here to do this one. I really want to look at the pictures. If you're not looking at the pictures, you're really doing a disservice to yourself and to your client, whether you're representing a buyer or seller, because on paper, these things can look a lot more similar than they are. So this one was one that sold at $459. It's David Weekley, built in 2007, 3.5 plan. I just want to look and see, why is this one about 50, 60,000 less? Is there anything visually that stands out to me? Why is this one less? So I see a good amount of wood, quite a bit of wood. I will tell you, unless it's really something egregious, paint, stylistic decor items, an appraiser won't put a lot of stock in. Do buyers really warm up or get, kind of turn cold based on how things are stylized? Absolutely. But there's no economic function there to an appraiser. So there's not gonna be any adjustment that you had a blue sitting room versus it just being a beige color. See a fireplace. I'm looking at this. Okay. I mean, this is out in Rogers Ranch. This is a pretty typical David Weekley home. I've got the granite. I've got some stainless. Oversized shower. Looks nice. A landing area. Game room. I'm looking at this one. A lot of times is helpful. Backyard is, reasonable. There's nothing that's, I think, especially fancy or notable. It does have a mature tree, some shade. It has a covered patio, decent sized covered patio. So to me, that looks like a kind of a stock David Weekley listing in Rogers Ranch. So then I would go and I'd be wondering, first thing I'd look at is, hey, this one that sold at $535 is actually smaller by 400 square feet. And yet it's selling, look at the difference in the per square foot, 135 to 178. We're going to talk about the impact on difference in size on per square foot, because the number one mistake that all the public makes and a lot of agents make is just think that per square foot is a linear item, that a neighborhood is $150 a square foot. And so whether I have a 2,000 square foot home or a 5,000 square foot home, I just take the size and go times 150, and that's the price. And that's about as wrong as you possibly can get. So, and you're going to have to walk your clients out of that trap. And so you understanding why it's a trap and how to avoid it will be really important in your dialogue, so you can explain why do bigger things cost more but price less per square foot. Be very important. But I do know, okay, this is 400 square feet. I'm curious why it's smaller and selling for more. New construction. So look, we're not immune to this, but the first thing I would do is go, Mark, of course, new construction. Lumber's gone up on this house probably $25,000 in the last 6 months. You know what I need to do to my CMA? I need to go back and refine my criteria. And they did sneak a new home in there on me. And I need to go back and go pre-owned. Look what I dropped down to. So now my pickings got a lot slimmer. So what would Mark do in this situation? I would probably spend some time looking at other sections in Rogers Ranch. Can I pull some inventory in there and pull it in? I'm not going to be in Cross Timber. I'm not going to be in Falling Brook, because that gets into some $1 million stuff. But that's a red flag to me to go back and pull some more inventory. I'm not going to go back a year, in my opinion. This is my personal opinion, because I think the pricing gets way too dissimilar. So I would be much more apt to go into the Vineyards, which is a similar neighborhood off Huebner Road extension there at 1604, and I would add inventory that way. That's how I would approach the problem. Could you get a different agent that might do it a different way? Possibly, but that's what I'd recommend. Aaron, you're out there, I think. What do you think? You want to chime in a question? I mean, a comment? I have to call on you, don't I?
I'm here, Mark.
Okay.
I was multitasking, though, I'll be honest.
Okay, no worries. So I'm in Rogers Ranch.
Yes, sir.
And I probably had 7 or 8 comps. I didn't put the pre-owned filter on it. So when we looked through a couple, I came up with one that was new. I dropped back in the pre-owned filter, and now I'm down to three listings. So my choices are, I could go further back in time. I'm working with the Salado Creek area, or I would probably jump to the Vineyards and stay within 6 months and try and pull similar inventory there.
I completely agree with you. I'd try to stick with, just because times are changing so quickly, I'd probably expand my search a little bit versus going back in time. I agree.
Okay, cool. And again, this is art. As much, more experience lets you be a better artist. But if you're kind of aware of some of the trade-offs and what you have to do, I think you can make better judgments. Could you get another agent in here that's experienced and say, no, I would just dig deeper and find something in Rogers Ranch? Very possibly. It's not a wrong answer, but sometimes when I get in those situations, I might just put some parameters. I think we've seen enough information to say this home is probably going to price somewhere between $450 and $550, right? So if I might just go out of curiosity, if I'm in an area, and go, hey, I'm going to block out this radius. Maybe I'm going to go 1.5 miles out and go, I want to look at things at 450 to 550 that are 3,000 square feet plus or minus 2 stories. I just want to see what comes up. And then, hey, maybe 18 homes comes up and I start to click through them. And then all of a sudden I notice a pattern. I get into a specific neighborhood that 4 or 5 homes that are very similar keep showing up in that neighborhood. Well, guess what? That would tell me that's a neighborhood worth consideration. And I might add that to my list of the Vineyard plus X community. So there are ways, when you know how an appraiser thinks, there are ways to sort of solve the puzzle from different angles. And as you get more experience, you'll deal with that. Okay, we're at about 1 hour.
I was going to say, I was going to chime in, Mark, and just tell folks, I can't tell you how often when I get to this point, this is the point where I stop and take a drive. When you're learning a new area, whether you're a new agent or just an agent working in an area, doing comps in an area you're not familiar with, you can only see so much from Google Google and MLS. Sometimes I'm hopping in the car, taking what I think I know to be the fact, and then I'm driving out and verifying that information.
Yep, good. Thank you, Aaron. So real quick, we're not going to spend a lot of time because I want to keep us moving. But real quick, I sort of do this, you know, hunt and peck type method on this. But my first gut would be based on what we just did is, you know what? I think I'm going to take my map off, and I'm going to pop in. And I got all these sections. So what I might do at first, and this is just me, I'm not saying this is the only way to do this, but I might say, let me look at all these sections, but I know I'm dealing with a home that's, you know, again, probably going to be between 450 and maybe I'll even go up a little bit. 575. How many homes does that give me? Ooh, nothing. Well, that's a bummer. So I'd go, okay, that pricing really didn't help me. Let me take the price off. What does that do for me? Gives me 5. Okay, let me just look at these real quick and see what I'm dealing with. Lower price point. Maybe, you know, maybe I'd use these, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe, you know, maybe I've got enough comps that I could pull and maybe use one of these as a filler. This is kind of showing me that the value from subdivision to subdivision is different. Could I make a mental adjustment for that? Absolutely. But that's sort of the process you're following to sort of, again, it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. You spin it a few different ways. In a perfect world, you go into a subdivision, you get like, it's all very similar. You're doing very little adjusting, very little searching. But when you run into sort of these dead ends, which you are going to, you're going to have to get a little bit creative. All right. Good. Okay. So with this being said, what do I want to do next? Okay, so that's sort of how I'm getting my raw material. Let me go back to my last search. I'll probably go prior, just because I had more data. So, you know, so in the beginning I was sitting here with, well, we're down to 3, but that's okay. We're going to sit here. So now I'm going to kind of jump back over and go, this is how I get my raw material. And again, because we have a 2-hour class, I'm not going to go deeper, but I would not stop at this. I am working to get at least 6, 8 comps. I'd love to see 3, 4 sales, 3, 4 actives. I think would be ideal if I ended up with more, 5, 6 sales, 4, 5 actives, maybe 6 actives. Absolutely. Because I'm trying to show my seller, I'm trying to paint a picture of this is kind of your immediate vicinity of what you're dealing with and what you're up against. I will do real quick. I'll make one other comment. A lot of times when in a listing presentation, I will do this. I'll start out by saying, let me just get rid of all these criteria for a second. I will start with this, and I probably should have done this first, but we're just kind of reversing the order here. I will start by saying, you know, we know the market's great, right? And we know there's less than 2 months inventory. But I kind of want to know what's going on in Rogers Ranch in a little more particular. And I'm at months back. Did I get that? I didn't. And I might, again, with what's going on in the market, I might just say, Mr. and Miss Seller, Mrs. Seller, again, not quite enough data. So maybe I'll go, hey, in the last 4 months, there have been, in all the sections of Rogers Ranch, I want to kind of give you a temperature, a 30,000-foot view of what's going on in Rogers Ranch in general. And I probably would lead with this and go, hey, we only have 4 active homes. We've got 2 currently under contract, and we've sold 6 in the last 4 months. Well, some basic math is 4 homes sold over 6 homes sold over 4 months is you're going to sell a home and a half per month. Has anyone ever actually sold a half home? It's hard to do, but mathematically, it's a home and a half per month that is selling. So if I look at what's available and I'm selling a home and a half per month, how long would it take me to sell 4 homes? And the answer is, you know, 2.5 months if you do the math, and I'm rounding off a little bit. What that's telling me is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the market in general is great. We have less than 2 months in inventory. Rogers Ranch, a little more narrowly is still really excellent, just over 2 months inventory. So the good news is the temperature in the market in your area is excellent. Now, let me dive into your particular type of home that we just did the CMA on. So I kind of reversed the order there, but I did just want to point it out while I was thinking of it. I will generally start a little broader view of look at the area. Maybe it's the subdivision, maybe it's the macro area. If I was doing something in Saddle Creek, I would probably pull everything on 1103. That's because they're very similar inventory, and say, hey, here's what's going on 1103. Homes are selling in 1.5 months or 2.5 months. The good news is, you know, it's a very strong market for a seller. So I would do that first, and then I would dive into the properties. Any questions on that? Or comments? Or spitballs? Okay. All right. So now I want to go back to the presentation. So I've sort of got my rough data. And bear with me just a second here. Okay. And back to this is how to pull a CMA. I got to get back on the screen. Okay. So the number one adjustment that we're going to make in and probably even in a common subdivision like a Wild Horse, like a Rogers Ranch, that's maybe, you know, something that's a little more stock like an Alamo Ranch, even though there's a ton of sections out there. The number one thing you're going to have to adjust for is square footage. And this gives you a very good illustration of how an appraiser would approach it. And you can work the math on this, and I would kind of keep this handy. But I'm going to do something that's a little bit more conceptual. And I just want to, I'm going to deal with round, even numbers to make this easy. And so if I'm adjusting for square footage, we're going to go plus or minus 20% square footage is the broad range. But again, I said if you could do less, that would be great. So for this illustration, I'm just going to go back to the mythical 3,000 square foot house. And I'm going to make the math super simple that we're selling at 100 per square foot, equal to 300,000. Okay, and let's assume for the sake of argument that we've see 3 sales, maybe 4 sales, exactly the same. Like this is as simple and straightforward as you can get. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's, when there's more inventory, sometimes when you are dealing with kind of the stock neighborhoods, you can find the same plan from a builder over and over. You can get very comparable, not this perfect, but you can get very comparable data. So you've got a listing appointment today, this afternoon, on your subject that has a 3,300 square foot house. And you want to get a value. And I'm going to check here to see if you have any questions. Okay, none yet. So the way the general public would do it, and frankly a lot of agents out there would do, is go, look, I know $100 a square foot. I know I got an extra 300 square feet. I'll just take 300 times 100 per square, and the value is an extra $30,000. So my price is $330,000. Would that be accurate? I'm going to answer for everyone. No.
Yeah.
What's that? No, I jumped in just to make sure I didn't go sideways on this. Okay, so it's not, and here's the reason. And again, if over time, if you're having conversations with appraisers and you want to have more credibility, if you know their lingo and you want to have more credibility with your clients and you can explain how an appraiser thinks, it's going to put you on a different level than a typical agent. So an appraiser has a gross living area factor. And they may say it slightly differently, but that's how I've heard it referred to. What does that mean? What it means is the value of each extra square foot isn't dollar for dollar. That each extra square foot of bill of materials, lumber, labor is a percentage of the original expense. And so if you can understand and equate this to Legos real estate, the way I explain it a lot is if I've got a 3,000 square foot house, if I could Legos real estate, if I could just kind of out of Legos build a 300 square foot addition and put it on, how much would it cost me to build? And the answer is, let me get this off here. Let me take this for a second so I can work up here. That an appraiser is going to give you about 35% on a good day if you're super lucky and maybe in a fast moving market. I have seen 40. I will tell you, when we give generalities, my experience is if the product looks good and the presentation looks good, it's a nice home in good condition, it's been staged well, you might swing to the favorable. If it's an average house, an average condition, a little scuffed, and the seller hasn't done a good job of staging, this might slide the other way. I've seen this as low as 33%. So I always advocate to my sellers, like, go the extra mile, do the work, wipe the baseboards, do the deep clean, let's do the staging work, because at the end of the day, you're going to get your return on the effort for additional equity. And for a lot of you that are up against like Open Door and those other programs, hey, the easy way out is, it's easier for the seller, but it's also going to reach into their pocket, because the Open Doors of the world are going to capture that equity for themselves. So if you can demonstrate, we're going to go this little extra mile, and yes, it's going to be some aggravation, it's going to be some work, it's going to be some discomfort, but there's maybe an extra $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 of equity. Is that a good return on your investment? And I will tell you, I haven't found many people that said, well, I'll let $30,000 go so I don't have to mess with staging and deep cleaning. Because, money, when they start to equate the dollars to it, then they get a lot more serious. So understanding this will be helpful. But back to my main point is, in this 300 square foot difference, the appraiser would say it's 300 square feet. And interestingly, in a URAR, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, this is really the only time that cost per square foot comes up, is they go, okay, 300 square feet times the run rate, the going rate in the neighborhood, times the GLA, and let's just say this appraiser uses 35%. And so that equals, someone do some quick math for me, 10,500. Thank you. 10,500. That's the difference. The value of that extra 300 square feet is 10,500. So the appraisal value would be, or the increased market value would be from 300 to 310,500. So I'm going to stop and just see if there's some questions on that. Anyone?
You're looking
Anyone?
good.
Okay. This is a big one. This is what you're going to do. Probably, I'll bet 2/3 of your adjustments over time will be around this. And it will be super critical for you to understand how it's done, so you can explain to the seller, this is what the value will be. And what what you have to be careful is not get caught in a line of fire in a listing presentation. Like, I'm not the bad guy that's trying to take away, in their mind, $20,000. I always say this: I would love to get you $330,000. You'd be happier. I'd be happier. I'd get a bigger commission, honestly. I get paid more. So who wouldn't want this to sell for $310,000? But I think I owe it as my duty as a professional to give you the accurate information on what's going to happen when the appraiser comes. Because honestly, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, selling a house in this market isn't all that difficult. Getting it to appraised, getting it to a value where we've maximized kind of least amount of time, highest price, and getting it to stick with the appraisal is really the trick. That's where the expertise is. So I'm going to take you on a path to get you as much as I can, but I don't want to overshoot it because it's fool's gold. Because if I did get it sold at 330, there's a distinct chance that it might fall out during the appraisal process. And now you've lost 2 or 3 weeks on the market. You may have to go back on market. So that's why I need you to know what the true value is. Now I'm going to call time out on myself for a second, because this market is so wacky right now that all the things I've been doing for 15 years are a little different here and now. So I would you need to understand that's kind of the standard stock explanation, and probably in 2 years, when we water finds this level, you'll probably back to be explaining it would only appraise for 310, so we need to price that with the finish line in mind. Here and now, you might see 8 offers, 15 offers, 20 offers. It could go well over appraisal value. Why does it matter? Well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, from an economic standpoint, the lender's going to see this value based on these calculations at X. We need to know that number because it's a point of reference, because there's a good chance you have a really nice home, a desirable area, there's not much inventory. We may start to see offers come in over and above and exceeding what would be the likely appraisal value. So now we need to have conversations with the listing agents. What steps are the buyers willing to take? Are they willing to eliminate low appraisal addendums? Are they coming in with significant cash down? Do we have a cash buyer? I think, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, there's, again, depending on the property, there's a really good chance that we can get you above appraisal value in this market. But we need to have a plan to get there. So if we see a multitude of offers, we need to know how to evaluate these. That if we think we're going to come in around this price, if the appraisal comes in short, is that particular buyer going to stick with us? And so I'm having those conversations with buyer's agents to say, hey, great offer, thank you very much, incredibly strong. I see you're at 330 with your offer, that's great, but I see you have a low appraisal addendum here showing 310 is the required appraisal price. Let's talk about that. If there is a shortage there or a difference there, me and my sellers want to know what your position is. Is that if I'm sort of in a multiple offer type situation, I want to know your negotiability. That's a point of negotiability. Can we get them to drop that appraisal addendum? Can we get them, if we can't get them to drop it, would they come up? So these are where these conversations get a little more in-depth and a little more complex than what I was doing right here. I think you have to know this to know the fundamentals, and then you have to adapt to your market here and now to say what's going on and how do I approach that. I would say if you're newer and you've got someone coming at you, if you've got a property that's coming at 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 offers, which is distinctly possible, if that were me, I'd kind of round that information up and I'd grab Alberto or Aaron and say, hey, I've got all these offers coming at me. I really want to work on my strategy. It's my first time doing it, or I've only done it a couple times. I want to work on a strategy to kind of navigate my seller to the highest and best point, because what could happen is you will, and I know some agents on this call have seen this, people will start really strong, but when the reality of the appraisal comes in, they disappear, they wilt. And so you don't want your buyer matched up with your seller matched up with a buyer that might wilt away when the reality comes in of you offer 330, but it's really only going to appraise at 310. So I want to stop that. And here and now, it's such a critical point. There's glare on the whiteboard. Can you show your work on top, please? Here, is that? I don't know that I can do much different. I don't think I can lean the thing either. Alex, I don't know that, hopefully this part helped. I don't know there's much else I can do. There's a little too much glare.
There's a bit of a glare. I can see that 100 times the 0.35 equals the 10,500, but I just want to make sure I got all of it.
Okay. Our assistant here is going to walk us through this. So real quick, just to recap, we had a 3,000 square foot house selling at 100 a square foot. So the value of these 4 sales is 300,000. Pretty simple math, but now you've got a listing where it's 300 square foot bigger. The average seller is going to go, oh, take my 300 square feet, times $100, I should be 330,000. But the appraisal math would say, no, wait a second, time out. You're getting a portion. You're getting the gross living area adjustment factor. I'll take your 300 square feet. I'll give you $100 a square foot because that's the going rate in the neighborhood. But I'm going to give you 35 cents on the dollar because that's the portion for that extra lumber bill of materials. People forget zoning and permitting and utilities and road work and all that is part of the cost of a house. But if you add a few feet of lumber, that's not included again. So that's why that number is 35, maybe 40 cents on the dollar. So in that scenario, your listing appointment for this afternoon where you've got a 300 square foot bigger house, you're going to take the 10,000 plus the average value of the houses, and what you should say is the appraisal value should come in at 310,500. Be real careful to say you're not an appraiser. I always say, look, I'm not an appraiser, but I've trained to learn how they think, and I just try and duplicate and mirror what they're doing as much as possible so my findings and research are as similar to theirs as possible. So be real careful if anyone asks you, or just don't represent yourself as, I've taken this class, I'm an appraiser now, because that's not the case. Alex, did that answer?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, good.
We lined up again.
All right, we back on track? Can everyone see me? Okay. My shiny forehead. All right. Nellie had a question. Okay, Nellie had one, kind of the opposite in this market, that the appraisal came in 3,000 under list. That's that probably means it was just not priced right. Someone probably did what I said to begin with, which is they just extrapolated too high, and the seller actually dropped the price. So good job for you, Nellie. Congratulations, that worked out. That is tough on the buyer's agent side. If you get in that gray area of, hey, the home, we're under contract for more than the house is worth according to the appraiser and the bank, how do you negotiate that? And I would say in this market right now, it's all negotiable, all spare and Love and Warren real estate. And it's, at the end of the day, it's where does your buyer want, if I'm looking at the buyer side for a minute, and I've got some people right now that are trying to chase a pool in 78232 and 78247. It's kind of like, I don't want to say it's an uphill battle, let's put it that way. And we're going to end up probably, we ended up making an offer 25,000 over what I perceive to be list value. But at the end of the day, the question was, what is, if you end up coming out of pocket that 25,000, is that something you are comfortable with? Does the lifestyle choice of you having a pool, you've said you want to be there in the next 10 to 15 years with your family, is that worth it to you? Think of it as a lifestyle investment. And I also had the conversation, like right now, the deal is not in the house price. It's not the sales price. The deal is in the money. So even if the house prices are inflated to some degree, the money is as close to free as it'll ever be, probably in anyone's lifetime. So it, in my opinion, more than offsets the fact that the prices might be higher than they would be in a perfect world. So you're still winning. And I think Aaron put out a little figurine of a house at 350. We'll get it back out, but the illustration was a house at 350 at today's rates was a lot better deal than the same house if the price dropped overnight to 300,000, but the rate was a point higher. You were actually much better off, quote unquote, overpaying 350 at an interest rate of 2.75. So those are the conversations you should be having with your on the buy side of like, hey, we realize we're in a premium market. You're going to pay a premium price, but you are essentially getting free money. And if the numbers, if the fundamentals still fit your budget, and you're in your comfort zone in terms of your budget, then it still economically makes a lot of sense. Okay. All right. What we got? 40 minutes here. All right. Good. Let me go back here. Okay. Appraisal definitions. I think I'm going to cover these for a second, and then we'll go back and do a couple more adjustments as we have time. There's a bunch of definitions here. I'm not going to hit them all, but I'm going to hit some of the top ones. Absorption rate. Remember that little exercise I did? There's six homes sold in 4 months. That averages 1.5 homes per month, and there's 4 available. So I'd sell those off in about 2.5 months. That's really referring to an absorption rate. That's a metric we use to figure out how much inventory is in the market. It really says if we froze all the houses and added no more, how long would it take to sell what we have? Historically, a balanced market between buyer and seller is 5 to 6 months. Right now, we're at less than 2 months, so it's clearly a seller's market. But just understanding how that calculation works is important. I'm going to tell you, for the vets that were around in like 08, 09, 2010, we were seeing 8, 9 months of inventory. Maybe in the luxury realm, it could be 13, 14, 15 months inventory. So things change over time. So, we're kind of in that situation where it's 2 months of inventory or less. That will not last forever. Okay, here's 2 critical ones. Okay, and I might just do the thing here. Comp better subtract. Comp inferior add. So I'm going to go back to our listing appointment for this afternoon. And chime in on the board if you can't see this, and I'll hold the mic up. But let's assume that our 3,300 square foot house has a pool plus pool. And we've already done the math, and to make it simple, it was a $50,000 pool, and we're going to get 40 cents on the dollar for that. So it's plus 20,000 in that value for the pool. Let's forget about square footage, everything else for a second. We're just doing plus. So I look at these comps.
I think you accidentally muted.
Oh,
Am I back on?
good to go.
Okay, thank you. So in this case, I'm looking at comp better subtract, comp inferior add. And this is saying when you look at the other properties, sometimes they're going to be better, sometimes they're going to be worse, and you have to adjust, because the whole point of this exercise is to get things as similar as possible. You know, we say apples to apples, but there's Dutch apples, there's Gala, there's, you know, Red Delicious, etc. We want to try and get those as close to possible. So to the same, to compare them. So in my scenario, your listing appointment for this afternoon, you've got the 3,300 square foot house, but it also has a pool. That's a big one. All right. In the pool, we did the adjustment to say it's a $50,000 pool based on the functionality. Maybe the pool's fairly recent, just a couple years old. So we're going to get 40 cents on the dollar for that pool. So all of a sudden, we got a big $20,000 line item on this property. And we're going to try and compare these houses that have no pool. How do we compare the homes with no pool to homes with pool? And this is that Legos real estate concept I said. For the sake of adjustments, you need to create a Lego pool and put it on. So to compare them, we're going to come out here and add $20,000 in value to these comps to make it more like our subject. Because we're trying to get a price where things are even, Steven, as much as humanly possible. Can everyone see that? I'm going to look here. Everyone see my board? Okay, that's a thumbs up. Yes. Okay.
Good
All
to
right.
go.
Okay. So now that I've added a pool to all these four houses magically, now I've kind of taken the difference in value and I've shrunk that pretty big, or excuse me, pretty significantly. So now I'm comparing things that are very similar. So really in this case, now let's assume these are all D.R. Horton homes built the same way, the same finish house, same time. Now really the only major adjustment I need to make is back to that square footage. So I'm working from similar information. Where this gets tricky in your head is when so this is the comps are inferior, they're less, so I gotta add the Lego pool. Now let's turn this around. Now the listing appointment I have this afternoon doesn't have a pool. I wish I had a better marker. But my four comps that I'm comparing it to all have pools. Well, can I really realistically compare a house without a pool, no pool, to ones that do have a pool? And the answer is no. So what I need to do is subtract. This is toast. I need to subtract. That didn't like that either. Last chance, third time's the charm. I need to subtract the value of a pool out of all three of these comps. So this is CBS. The comps are better, so I subtract. The other example I used was CIA. The comps were inferior, they were lesser, so I added. This one's tricky because if you do like me, the first time I did it, I like inversed it and I made the values blow up. They went all over the map. So all we're saying is, hey, this subject for that listing appointment this afternoon doesn't have a pool. The comps I'm comparing it to, I'm going to just take out and say, what would the house be worth? If I just pretended we're going house to house here, and I took those values out, now what's the difference?
You got a better one?
Oh, thank you so much.
There you
Appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
All right. Help from the peanut gallery. Woo! Okay. I want to stop here for a second because this is critical. Now, I would tell you an easier way to do this is if you can find enough like product, like in my case here where there's no pool, that if I could compare and get a good CMA with houses with no pool and I don't have to adjust, that's what I'd like to do. Because again, the less you have to adjust, the more they're naturally alike, the better the value. But life just isn't always going to be fair that way. And truthfully, if you have 4 other comps, maybe 2 of them have a pool and 2 don't. So maybe you're just subtracting 2. Especially in a place like Rogers Ranch, where pools are common but they're not exactly standard, you're going to have a mix. So if you can understand 2 definitions back to the presentation, comp better, subtract. If the house I'm comparing it to is better, I got to take that feature away. If the comp I'm comparing it to is lesser, I got to add it in because I got to try and get these things as even as possible. We're going to come back and see an example on a advanced CMA on that in just a little bit. Let's see. Those are probably fundamentally 2 of the most important things to know. So let me get back here. All right. We've already talked about contributory value. How much would any one feature? How much would a pool? How much would an outdoor kitchen add? We're probably not going to have time to get into it, but one of the documents that I shared is NAR's cost versus value report, which actually shows the cost, the average cost of projects in San Antonio, and then you can see the percentage that a value is being recouped on those projects. It's a good guide, but I would just say, information is important, but don't fail to use your judgment. Like I looked at the average cost of a major kitchen remodel in San Antonio was $124,000. And if I remember, you were getting something like 65% back. Could you do a major kitchen remodel in San Antonio, a pretty nice one for less than $124,000? I think so. If you were in Alamo Heights, could it cost more? Absolutely. So that's like a data point that you sort of have to make some adjustments. My kitchen remodel in Stillwater Ranch is going to be a whole lot different than the one in Alamo Heights. So those are some averages. It's helpful information, kind of like the comp guide we're going to look at in a minute that answers some of these other questions. It's a starting point. And again, if you tell an appraiser, I got a comp guide and I just adjust everything, they're going to roll their eyes at you. The point of a comp guide is not to plug in 12 values. It's like, hey, I made things as similar as possible just through selecting my comps, and maybe I got 1 or 2 things I need to adjust, maybe a maximum of 3 or 4 on maybe a higher end home that could have a lot of features, but you're trying to use that thing as little as possible. It's just there for helpful information when you're kind of in the dark or in the lurch a little bit. Sure.
What was the name of the document you mentioned?
NAR, cost versus value, and it's on the materials that Beth sent out. Okay. What do I want to talk about here? Effective age is important. Again, if I'm on Alamo Ranch, I might see a kitchen that's probably from the 1960s, been remodeled once, but it was done in 1966. And I might see something that was done in 2016. The effective age of those properties can be vastly different, and it will have major swings on value. So effective age is very important. External obsolescence, having a water tower, having a power line behind you, being backed up to a strip mall, those are things that have a negative, they're external, but they have a negative impact on your value. How much? Again, an appraiser would say, well, show me, like on that strip mall example, show me 4 sales backed up the strip mall and show me 4 sales in the neighborhood, and that's how you'll isolate your value. In a perfect world, you can do that. Functional obsolescence. You get into some of these homes in Churchill Estates, and there's 4 or 5 up and downs throughout the property. That's how those homes were all built in the time. But I will tell you, a good percentage of your buyers will have a negative reaction to that. So some of them may have a step down in a particular room, like the living room, but I've been in some of them where there's 4 or 5 step up, step downs. That can have a functional obsolescence impact on the floor plan and diminish your value. Let me go back. Median. One thing I want to say real quick, median, like when we did the CMA report, it will show median prices and average. It probably in the typical neighborhood, if I'm dealing with similar things like Turning Stone, Wild Horse, Alamo Ranch, Stillwater Creek, probably not much of a difference. But if you get into some maybe higher end markets or remote areas, and maybe like if you get in maybe out Bulverde a little bit, you might have a bunch of homes at 400,000 and one at 1.2 million. Well, that 1.2 million property will skew all the averages. So median is the point where half the homes are more and half the homes are less. And so when you're looking at days on market, price per square foot for similar inventory, percentage of list price, I like to work with median, because if you have average, you could have that one listing that skews it way up or way down. Maybe there was one really dogged foreclosure that stayed on the market forever because it was totally trashed. It might bring all those averages down. So just be aware of that. Net adjustments, we talked about this. After you do all your net adjustments, it should be less than 15% of the sales price. I really try and keep that less than 5% if I can. Are there exceptions? Sure. But again, I'm trying to get these things as close to possible, as naturally similar as possible in my selection process. So when you do an in-depth CMA, an advanced CMA, and you've got things ranging 10, 15, 20, 25% different after you do all your calculations, that's probably a red flag. Like, back up, and can I just do a better job of selecting things that are more similar? The answer often is yes, maybe sometimes no, but at least you've thought about it. Sales comparable, we've talked about. Okay. I'm not going to cover that. So what I want to do now is go to the comp guide sheet. And see if I can throw that up there. Okay. Okay. So I tweaked this thing a little bit in working on it. I revisited it. This thing was a few years old, and I worked with 2 other agents. Here's what I'll say. You get some other good experienced agents up here, they can come up with some different numbers. This is not a Bible. But what I would say, this is a working document based on, I will say, 3 agents with combined 1,500 sales and running it past an appraiser that's been an appraiser for at least 20 years, and kind of sort of amalgamation, like we've sort of put our heads together and come up with these things. I would take all of these items as starting points. You can see that the values are in ranges. So when it says, like the first one says, right here, per additional full bath, $8,000 to $10,000. Am I probably doing it different at 400,000 than I am at 600,000? Yes. What I will say, again, I just want to start this point again by going, an appraiser, the appraiser I worked with said, Mark, we don't have appraisal, comp guides. We go identify and isolate, go find me 3-4 sales with the extra bathroom and 3 or 4 sales without, and do your comparison that way. And he is right. However, life doesn't always end up so neatly that way, because the one with the extra bathroom might have the pool, and the one with a lesser bathroom has the pool. So you end up with so many variations that sometimes it's good that the way I would say to use this guide is to say, I'm in Rogers Ranch, around $500,000. I've got an extra bathroom in this property. I've kind of isolated everything out. What would I think maybe the value of that bathroom is? I don't know, $8,000, $9,000. That would be how I would look at it. And then I would look for data that supports that. Now, can I do some searching? Can I isolate some things and support that? That's what the appraiser is going to want to see. And you would never turn this in with like your appraisal packet and go, well, my house has the extra bathroom, and the guide I got from my brokerage says add $8,000 to $10,000. They'll laugh. However, this is still helpful information to give you sort of a kind of a work product of people who have been doing this a long time. And actually, this has been through the hands of 2 different appraisers, the original appraiser and then the one I updated it with. So it's a reference point, and that's how you should treat it. So if I'm looking at some of these critical ones, a couple notes. The appraisers hate the fact that you would work from a comp guide, but the truth is they work from a database. It's just all this information from millions of sales plugged into a computer that spits out a value. So they cheat. That's how I say it. They cheat. And appraisers will always tell you is isolate the value. Show me where the pool is selling for $30,000 more by getting me enough homes that are all similar with pools and without. That's the objective. Okay. additional information, you can go to that NAR report that I referenced that Beth sent out to everyone. That's, again, another data point. I'm going to say I think my adjustments are lower in general than what you see on that NAR sheet. But again, this is just being in the market on the ground, and kind of as listing agents over time, you get banged on the head enough by appraisers like, hey, my appraisal came in 5,000 short, 10,000 short. You get banged on the head enough and you look at their report and you see what they're allowing, you adapt. And again, line item adjustments, man, a perfect CMA has 0. Probably a typical one has a couple. Maybe it's a pool, maybe it's an outdoor kitchen, something like that. Maybe if you start to get up in the 800,000-900,000 range and there's more unique, distinct characteristics of the property, you might have 3, 4, 5. I will tell you, this is a couple years old, this information, but I did this report off the old one, and I extrapolated it up to a house that started the market at 1.6, it went to 1.5. My buyer wanted to offer 1.3. I went and did the in-depth CMA, and I came up with 1,425. And I took these numbers and just kind of like times them by the sales price going up, and the final value came in at 1,431. So on a sale of 1.4 plus million, I was off 6,000 from my CMA to the actual appraisal. So there is value here, there is merit here, but it's not a Bible. It's a working guide that you can use to help guide you, especially for newer people. A lot of these are straightforward. Why do I said earlier, I'm not going to give difference between a 3-bedroom with a game room versus a 4-bedroom when the square footage is the same. But why am I going to give difference on bathrooms? It's simple. There's economics in bathrooms. There's more plumbing, electrical, a lot of work in a bathroom that you don't have to do when you just sheetrock a game room and turn a game room into a 4th bedroom. So bathrooms definitely can have a value. Fireplaces, I argued with Jeff about this yesterday. A lot of appraisers would say, and again, appraisers aren't all exactly the same, right? So they have opinions and variances too. But a lot of them argue that a fireplace really isn't even that functional in South Texas. It's more like a decoration. And so am I going to give you an extra $15,000 because you have a fireplace? No. So be aware of that. Would I maybe go higher than these values if I need to support a higher listing price? Do I know buyers like fireplaces and probably would be emotional and offer more because it's a fireplace? I believe yes. That's like my marketing listing hat side. But I also got to be aware that, hey, that appraiser is coming behind me, and he or she is not going to probably offer a lot of value. HVAC systems, HVAC, a lot of times we put a lot of stock in that. You know, and if you talk to enough appraisers, here's their retort. Well, tell me a house you were going to sell that didn't have an HVAC system. You kind of like want to grab them and slap them. But what I would say is, hey, if you've got one system that's 3 years old and the other one's 6 years old, they don't care. But if you're in Churchill Estates and a lot of the units might be 15, even the ones that have been redone might start to be 15, 18 years old, and I've got a brand new one, could the appraiser give you some value for that? Sure, but it's got to be pretty distinct. So we see a lot of listings like new roof, new HVAC. There is some value there. There's definitely marketing value. There's some appraisal value. It's just not all that you would think it would be. It's nowhere near the cost. I will tell you, a lot of sellers will hand you the receipts and say, I spent this, I spent that. And they don't understand that you're getting prorated value because the assumption is there was an AC there anyways. It's worth something. So now that I put a new system in, I take away the value of what was going to be there. And now I'm talking about the difference. And then we see from the cost versus value report, the appraiser is probably going to give you 50, 60 cents on the dollar. So the buyer or seller thinking, wow, man, there's $15,000 worth of value there. When you do the math of, well, there should have been a working unit there anyways, it was $8,000, and now the spread's $12,000, and maybe I get $5,000, $6,000. I'm lucky to get that. Once you understand that, you can communicate that to your seller. I'm gonna take a second here and see if we're gonna ask about solar. We're gonna get to solar in just a second. Covered patios, some of these things, like, on the lower price points, there's some value, but look, hey, when you start to get in this price range and go up, a covered patio is kind of an assumption. If I'm buying a $400,000 house, I'm getting a covered patio, so I might only give value if it's like significantly different and better. It's not a 10 by 10. I spent the extra money with the builder. I went 20 by 20. Okay, an appraiser will give you some value for that, but it's not. The builder probably charged you $25,000. you're not getting 25,000. In that case, if you got maybe $5,000 on an appraisal, you're probably doing pretty good. Ones that are pretty come up a lot, additional garage bay. Again, a little bit of value there if you're dealing like 0 versus 1 or 1 versus 2 in the lower price points. But as you get in these higher price points, everything in here is probably a 2, probably a 3. So you could give the value of if you had a 3 instead of 2s, you could give that value. If you start to get in this price range of 800,000 $1 million, probably everything's a 3, so you might have a 4. So you would give the value for that 4th bay. Do not give value just because you have a 3-car garage if every other comp has a 3-car garage. They're same. So don't fall in that trap of, oh, I have a house with a 3-car garage, I'm going to add $12,000. No, you only assigning the value when it's superior, or you're only taking away when it's lesser. Some of these stuff, pool, we've kind of covered. I'm not going to do these all. Granite and wood gets a little tricky. Again, if I'm in a community that has all granite, and maybe my granite's level 4 and the other stuff's level 2, I probably won't even adjust for that. I might do a little bit in kind of the fit and finish of the property. Am I going to be maybe 5 or 10,000? Because if I spent that money there, I probably went with a slightly better lighting package and the slightly better fixtures in the bathrooms and sink. Yeah. So is it sort of a package? Yes. But if a house is exactly the same all the way across and one's level 2 granite, one's level 4, probably the adjustment value on that is 0. And so this kind of gets, though, a little bit more into where there's significant remodels, especially again in Alamo Heights. And I will say, when you get into some of this upper end stuff, it gets crazy. You get into some of the materials. Erin could probably tell you about some of the things she's seen in Scenic Canyon. I've seen some stuff that's $200 a linear foot. Some of the Italian marble stuff, it's pretty crazy. Same thing with wood flooring. There can be a difference. But again, just because you have wood flooring, you don't bump on a bunch. You look at the other houses, and do they all have wood flooring, and is it in the same area? Sure. If you took wood through the entire house, could you add some value for that based on these per square foots? Yes. But don't get trapped. A lot of sellers will want you to go into this trap. Give me the benefit of every extra or plus thing I did in the house, and don't take away any of my negatives. And that will lead you to overinflate it. Even in this market, you'll end up with a value that's just not realistic. I always say you have to do the puts and the takes. So if they got good things, give them the credit. But if they got deficiencies, you have to take that away. That's how you keep it realistic. Okay. All right. Let's see. I'm going to just check for a couple questions. New roof versus old roof. I think roofing sort of gets back into that question of if I would look at the area. Maybe I'm in New Territories off 1604 Gilboa area, and the roofs are 15, 20 years old, and I got a brand new roof. Am I going to get some appraisal value for that? I think so. Probably I'd look at, the roof is probably going to cost $6,000, $7,000, maybe $8,000 in that price range. But an appraiser would say, look, there's got to be a roof on a house you sell, right? That's when I want to slap them again. But I would go, okay, well, that would probably be worth even a couple $1,000s. So you spent $8,000, and then it was probably going to be worth $2,000 or $3,000. So now the difference is $5,000, and I'm going to give you partial value, a couple $1,000, maybe $2,500 if you're lucky. I would say in an ascending market, you probably are going to get, they're trying to reach that higher value in a lot of cases right now. You might get some value, but I will tell you, 10 years ago, you were getting nothing. So it's fluid. Some of the stuff about waterfront and everything is kind of pretty unique. If you start to get into some of the stuff with waterfront, go through your manager. That's real. I would not sell a waterfront home, by the way. You have to find an agent that does that all the time because it's so specific and there's so many issues about tides and currents and things like that. You got to really know what you're doing. Slab repairs are kind of a big one. I'm not going to read through that, but obviously a crack foundation has a huge marketing impact, and because of that, I'll have a appraisal impact. Outdoor living areas are a feature that can definitely add some value. But again, if you're in Rogers Ranch and every house has an outdoor living area, don't be changing value based on that unless you have something dramatically different. Solar panels was the one that came up. So the answer to this one is, who knows? So I have done multiple properties and talked to multiple agents over the years and seen multiple posts on all the broker underground and all that stuff. And I've seen a lot of cases where it's 0. However, I just got my first one and it was a little $200,000 house. So how anyone can explain this to me, I don't know, but I got a $5,000 positive adjustment for solar panels. I will say I collected the bills for the last 6 months. That's the time she had the system in line. And we showed it essentially going from $200 a month to $20 a month, so I could demonstrate some economic value. Maybe there were some recent sales in the area that supported that. That's what the appraiser is going to tell you. Show me 3, 4 other sales where you did get extra money. The highest I've heard in this local market is I heard an agent I know got $16,000, but that was a system that was paid off. They had all the documentation. There are other sales in the neighborhood. So this one, solar panels are in flux. And you've just got to prepare your seller that if we get a favorable appraiser, we provide the right documentation, we could get value. But I need you to know there's a chance it could come in at 0. 2 years ago, I did a $600,000 house at the Reserve at Fredericksburg Road, and he had a gorgeous solar panel system in. It was probably $30,000, and the seller got 0. So it's a moving target is probably part of the answer. Okay, I think I answered solar panels. Jenny's question about could you explain your market value in 10 minutes? That's a great question. I mean, you can always give the abridged version, but that's not what I'd want to do. If I'm sitting with a seller, I'm taking more time to go through this. I will say if there's anything that's kind of, if I'm getting into adjustment, if I'm doing Wild Horse, I probably can get through the value literally in 10 minutes. If I'm doing Rogers Ranch and there's lot size issue, because you're not only dealing with a seller with what you actually need to adjust, you're dealing with their perceptions. Again, they're expecting to get an extra $175 a square foot for every square foot. They spent $25,000 on solar. They're expecting to get all that. They put a pool in. They spent $80,000 with Gary Pool. They're expecting to get $80,000. That conversation is not 10 minutes. Not 10 minutes. So I hope that helps. Okay, I got a little bit of time. I want to show you 2 things. And definitely we'll take questions, but there's 2 things I want to show you. Let's go over here. Drop that down. Look, you're not going to do this. I used to do this, but really, sort of with like Moxie and Moxie Presents, you're never going to do this, but I just want to kind of show you something. So this is in here. I'm not even going to worry about getting there, but I just want to kind of show you the puts and takes thing. So there's a pretty in-depth program on MLS that anyone can use. So if you want to knock yourself out, go for it. But really, this is sort of an Excel spreadsheet that can make all the changes at once. So I just want to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Here were these 3 sales. And I just want to point out that like on the adjustments on square footage, my subject was this. My house that I was comparing it to was bigger, so I had to take away the $23,000 in extra value. And I did that again, price per square foot times the difference times 0.35. I did allow positive, like these other houses didn't have the half bath. My subject did. So I put in the value on those other houses in the exercise to get them closer. And I just want to point out, like here was the list price, right? $690, $642, $699. And when I got done all my adjustments, I did some stuff for lot size and roof. It became $668, $627, and $701. So those prices were adjusted. So if I just to show you, take a quick note of those 3 prices. And my house didn't have a pool, but I'm going to pretend it did for a second. And I needed to go into all 3 of these houses and say, you know, this was a higher end neighborhood. I'm going to give you $40,000 because you're inferior, Mr. Comp. All 3 comps are inferior to my subject. Whoops, that's 4,000. And I'm magically putting in 3 pools on these other houses that don't have them so I can compare them to my subject. And if you hit the calculate button, keep an eye on these figures, 668, 627, 701, 708, 667, 741. Now I've adjusted them. Now I've made them similar. Now I can sit down with the seller and say, I'm comparing apples to apples as humanly possible. To show the difference, if my subject house didn't have a pool and these all did, when we do the magic again, 628, 587, 661. So that program kind of just does all the calculus for you Again, I wouldn't worry about it. It's overcooking it, but I just wanted you to see what making the proper adjustment for comp better subtract or comp inferior add, what that can have on an adjusted price of a property. So with that being said, I just want to show you in Moxie, and then we'll take questions if I can get there. Can I get there? Hang on a second. I'll do it on my computer and then I'll blow it up. Okay, that if you're in Moxie and you're doing Moxie Present, and so here's one I did I was working in Rogers Ranch for this class. I actually had to turn it in for a relocation company. So I've got my subject I've already put in. I'm just going to go forward here, a couple clicks. And I'm not a Moxie Pro yet. I'm learning like you guys are, but I would encourage you. So I put in my comps that I had pulled, and I've included them all. That gives them the little checkbox. When I hit include all, it gives them the checkbox. And I hit continue one more time. I just want to show you that you can then go into your subject here, add adjustment. And let's say, what's a big one? Outdoor kitchen. And let's pretend that my subject had an outdoor kitchen. This comp doesn't. So I want to make it more, I want to bring the comp up to be more similar to my subject. And I'm going to allow $10,000 at this price point. And keep an eye, it was at $569. And now you've got the adjusted price of $579. So if you want to be like a pro, look like a pro, this is very slick. Use your Moxie. Go in here, and I would say maybe you're doing a couple adjustments max, but you're just showing the seller, I'm paying attention. I'm looking at your neighborhood. I'm not just looking for 2 stories with the same size, but I'm making note that they have an outdoor kitchen or don't, or they have a pool and they or don't. I am doing some in-depth looking, and I'm presenting you. I've kind of boiled this down to give you the value. So this program will do this for you. And so I intend to do more of this in the future. I will say I do all my pre-workout in MLS because I can manipulate it easier and faster. And then I would just come in here and maybe make a couple adjustments. Let me show you one. Like this one, let's say I had an adjustment for a pool, and that took I took out the value of a pool, and it took the list price down from $590 to $560. So again, that comp was better. It had a pool and mine didn't. I took out the $30,000. Okay. Sandra's question, was that MLS? I think you're referring to the advanced CMA. Yes, that's in there. I'm not gonna spend any time on that. If you were just super curious, you probably could take a class over at Sabor, and it will kind of give you one place to do all your adjustments, and you can kind of see it magically do its action. I used to do that a lot 3-5 years ago, but because the tools from the broker have gotten better and more sophisticated, I really don't bother. But I will do the math and understand the process, and then just put it in a presentation form that the seller can digest.
Okay, and can I ask, on Moxie, are you putting in the numbers, or does it generate it?
So the way I do it, then I let me go back here, see if I go back. I got to get on the right. Come on, Mark.
It's a little bit hard to see, like, the screen.
Yeah, can you? Is it the glare or just the angle?
Yeah, it's the glare, and just I mean, it just looks tiny. Maybe my eyes are old. I don't know.
I feel you. I put in the MLSs. You can. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a string there where you can put it in MLSs. So I pre-selected those MLSs MLS numbers out of MLS, doing my standard CMA, and then I come put them in here. Can you do it the other way? I think the answer is yes, but I think it's clunkier. So and again, remember how I kind of played around with I'm going to go look at the vineyard. I'm going to go back 6 months. I might look at 4 months. I might check 2 months. Just from my experience, all that sort of raw material work is easier in MLS than it would be in Moxie, my opinion.
Okay, but when you said outdoor kitchen, $10,000, you came up with $10,000, not Moxie.
Yeah, that is correct. And I'm referencing the 2 ways you should do that is first you would go into MLS and see, can I isolate 3 sales, 4 sales with outdoor kitchens, 3, 4 sales of similar homes without. If you can isolate the value, you might come up with even a tighter number. It might be 8,500. It might be 11,500. If you don't have that, then in absence of that, I look at the comp grid that I provided, and I use that as a reference point. And I will tell you, even with the comp grid I provided, if the home is nice and presented well and showing sharp and market demand's high, can those numbers skew up? Sure, absolutely. If the home's kind of beat and rough and not presenting well and it's in an area with not a lot of demand, could that swing to the lower end of the spectrum? Absolutely. But I am making all those calculations first, and then I'm putting it in Moxie, and then I just go forward a page, and I'm doing 1 or 2 adjustments in Moxie. I'm not showing them all the making of the sausage. I'm giving them a brat with a little bit of mustard in a bun, and here it is.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Good. Question time. I know we're right at 12 o'clock, but if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'll hang around.
I did have one about the functional obsolescence. I did an open house that had the laundry room had these really steep stairs. And so I know that's going to be a turnoff for a lot of people. It was scary to me, like thinking about going down those stairs with laundry. So what would you calculate on something like that?
So I'd kind of, if something like atypical like that, I'd kind of look at what is my list price. And then I'd ask myself, what, if I send 10 buyers through here, how many am I going to lose over that issue alone? Sounds like it's pretty rough. I mean, would half my buyers walk away maybe over that? Does the house have enough other really cool things going for it that they might put up, because every house has a lemon somewhere pretty much. Mm-hmm. Like if it's got a great pool and a great outdoor living area and it's a great neighborhood, but it's got a lousy stair set to the laundry room, maybe I'm knocking it off a few $1,000s in my mind. Maybe I'd take $5,000 off the list price. If the house is kind of blah anyways, and I'm going to have trouble with it, I'm going to point out to the seller, like, hey, I think this is going to be, I'm not going to say it, but due to the lack of other great features of the home, this is all there. When the buyer kind of does their Ben Franklin, if you remember that, positives and negatives, there's not going to be much positive column and there's going to be this big negative. I might take off more off the list price.
Okay.
Good. I hope this was helpful if the people still hanging around. Good, good. And again, you just keep in mind, this is good. It's good to have too much information and not need it and not use it much than to not have the information and just kind of be lost when you don't. So 80-90% of the time, it's going to be pretty straightforward, minimal adjustments, but it's good to have this toolkit in your bag. If you really have to kind of delve in and maybe it's a property that's unique and you have 4 or 5 or 6 other adjustments, you can do it if you have to. Cool. Anyone else with a question? If Jenny, if you're still out there, I think you had a pretty specific scenario. If you want to get with me, I'll be here a little bit this afternoon and definitely tomorrow. Just come find me and we'll sit and do that one-on-one.
Oh, it's not a specific, it's just the process of how to adjust it. So example, I'm gonna make my CMA to apples, and then if I don't get anything from that, I'm gonna adjust from the subdivision. I'm gonna widen the area, and then if I don't get anything from that, I'm gonna adjust it on the if it's 6 months sold within 6 months or 3 months. So my question is, how do you do yours? What is your sequence of which one to adjust first? Because like I've said, if we're going to sit down on a courtroom, the judge will ask, how did you do yours? will you base it on, are you subjective on it, or what are your objective reason?
Well, what I would say, if a judge asked me that question, I'd say, Your Honor, first of all, so I don't get thrown out of court or fined. I would say it's part subjective and part objective. The objective criteria I can use is I start with the core guidelines of an appraisal is I'm going to try and stay in the same subdivision. I'm going to look at properties that are 20% or less, plus or minus in size. I'm going to stick with the same floor plan. I'm going to compare 1 stories to 1 stories, 2 stories to 2 stories. I'm going to try and find things where there are less adjustments I need to make than possible. So if I've got a house with no pool, I'm going to try and look to other houses that are similar without pools first. If I have a house with pools, I'm going to try and find enough other comps with pools to compare it to. If I can't find things that line up perfectly, then I will make some economic adjustments, plus or minus, for things like a pool, a lot size, an outdoor kitchen. And I'm going to follow the process. And honestly, those calculations are based on a lot of historical information on how appraisers approach the process. So I'm going to follow that. I'm not an appraiser, but I'm going to follow that as closely as possible. And at the end of the day, there is some subjectivity on an outdoor kitchen. Would maybe one agent think that's worth an extra $7,500? Another agent say it's worth $10,000, and a third agent think it's worth $12,500. Absolutely. And that's all within sort of the, at that point, the value in the eye is in the beauty of the beholder. So there is, even though we're following a kind of a set process, there is some subjectivity built in, and that's why even no 2 appraisals ever come out exactly the same. Does that help?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much on that one.
I will tell you, windmills are a plus $40,000 adjustment per windmill. So looks like you're sitting on about $240,000 there.
Wow. I'm gonna put some windmill on my property.
Yeah, it's looking good right now, and you got the little riverfront, so you're doing good.
So I got 4 in there, or 5.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's her filter. Either that or Jenny's dialing in from Holland. Okay, anyone else? All right, well, I think I've bored you guys to death enough, but I hope it was helpful. And I would say, you know, occasionally pop in on this class, and you're going to have other real life examples, and come in and ask questions. And for agents or experience, I love to hear different perspectives. I will not say I've got this is not a lockdown science. This is an art form. It's a painting. You are working from some principles, so there is some paint by number element, but everyone does it a little bit differently, and things change. Like the last 2 months has shown us that, and solar panels have shown us that it is somewhat of a moving target.
Mark, I'm sorry if anybody wants to leave. I just have a really quick question. If I was going to practice CMAs like this, like where would you start? Just pick an address and then go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I would do is I would work on doing a couple, and I would do them at different price points. Again, if you do kind of more of a basic area, if you kind of want to get your fundamentals 101 down, you might go to an area like Wild Horse, where it's very D.R. Horton, common, you know, similar type structures. And the biggest variance probably really is going to be a couple things: square footage, and have the people gone in and put granite and carpet in yet. And I'd kind of play with those basics. And then if you wanted to step up to something a little more challenging, you might kind of work your way into like the Rogers Ranch area, where there can be homes that vary as much as 15 or 20 years in age. There are people that are, you know, they're nice homes in general. Some people have gone in and done serious improvements and updating and remodels. They've added pools, they've gutted kitchens. There are some that have stayed a little more, you know, original in nature and just maybe done minor improvements. So you could play with that. And then when you really want to test yourself, go play in like a high-end neighborhood like the Dominion, scenic canyons. You might go out into the countryside a little bit and play with some properties that are like wildly different, and just see what you can make work. And honestly, sometimes, especially when you get in the country, sometimes you just can't bang the square peg hard enough to get it in the round hole. You know, we talked about being in very similar areas, but if you're out, you know, kind of around 1863 or 46, you might end up going 5 or 10 miles out to find a similar property. But that's kind of the advanced course. I would definitely, if you're newer at this, I'd kind of go and find 1103 has some good kind of standard, I want to say, you know, more builder basic neighborhoods. Alamo Ranch, they have some definitely nicer sections, but they have some more builder basic sections. Stillwater Ranch has like inventory. nothing, you know, they're all fine, but they're like, I'm talking about similarities. And then you can go into neighborhoods. If you know, and price will tell you a lot. When you start getting to 400,000 to 600,000, now you're seeing people go in and drop some serious money into houses. That's fun to play with. Another great one, if you want to play around, go look at Hollywood Park, because you've got inventory that's been sitting there since 62 that hasn't been touched. And you've got people in that have gone in and gutted those things and raised ceilings and $100,000 kitchen remodels and all that kind of stuff and changed roof lines. So if you just want some practice, that'd be a, you know, and you want to get a little more advanced, that'd be a good one too. Hollywood Park. And to Aaron's point, driving around and checking some of these things out is good too. Like if you did Hollywood Park, it's right across the street. You could play on kind of like in the lab on the computer and do some stuff, and then give yourself a list of 4 or 5 properties and drive by and go, hey, I thought it was worth this. Now that I pull up to the curb, do my eyeballs kind of match what the computer told me? Hope that helps. Good. Anyone else? All right. Well, I'm going to turn you guys loose. Thanks for bearing with me. And we'll see you again maybe in a couple months.